Hello and welcome to episode 14 of I'll Knit If I Want To. I am going to go ahead and jump right in. The first question today is asking about the benefits of blocking and often hear about how yarn blooms. I find myself thinking that when wool is dyed, it goes through several baths. Would it not bloom and relax then? What happens in the spinning, dyeing, knitting process that affects the wool, making the final blocking so noticeable? So let's just talk about from the point when we buy it, because it does obviously go through a lot during all those different processes, whether it be the spinning of it, the dyeing of it. Those can switch orders. Sometimes it's dyed then spun, sometimes it's spun then dyed. But just from the point at which we buy it, it usually either comes in a skein that's been twisted up into, or sometimes it's already ready in a ball. If it's in a skein, we're then going to throw it onto a ball winder or hand wind it to get it into a ball, and then we're going to knit with it. So just the process of winding that yarn into a ball and then knitting with it is going to stretch the yarn. Sometimes we make mistakes, we tear it out, we knit with it again. All these things are kind of putting stress on the yarn. So, and we're manipulating the yarn into a fabric, into a new shape. It's no longer just, twisted up into a skein or wrapped up into a ball. And so when we give it a bath, that wool, that yarn, is able to soak up this water, and it just lets it relax and it fluffs up all those fibers again. I've even seen people just take yarn that's hung out for a long time that maybe they bought years ago, and they'll hit it with a steamer and you can just see the yarn kind of puff and relax. And so that is the blooming that we're looking for. Today I'm actually wearing my Even Fall sweater, which just released this week. And this is knit up out of one of my favorite yarns. It's called Flock from a Verb from Keeping Warm. And this is a farm yarn that is US grown and milled. It's a single ply yarn, and when you're knitting with it, it seems very fine. But due to the fact that it's not plied, it's only a single ply, it's not twisted with any other yarns, I find that this one, especially when you give it a bath, the whole strand of yarn just seems to plump and fill in and create this really stunning fabric. It also helps to soften yarn. So if you are using wool and maybe you're using a little bit of a stiffer or scratchier wool, and this actually absolutely goes for linen yarn, with washing and blocking, it will help soften those yarns. So that would be another reason to block. All right, next question. If a sweater pattern calls for a non-superwash yarn, what rule of thumb do you use if you want to knit in a superwash? Do you try to get the same gauge as listed and then just plan for growth? What things would you need to consider to make sure the fit will be just as perfect as you would have if using the recommended non-superwash yarn? I've seen others do it, but I've had 2 bad experiences and wondered if there's a rule of thumb or tips to keep in mind. So if you are going from a non-superwash to a superwash yarn, for anyone who doesn't know, a non-superwash yarn has not been chemically treated to strip itself of its properties that would let it felt. When a non-superwash yarn can be agitated in hot water and it will start to felt and lock together. So that also means that a non-superwash yarn has really good memory and bounce back, and it doesn't tend to stretch out as much. A superwash yarn has gone through some sort of treatment process to basically strip it of the scales that are on the hair fibers. And when we strip it of those scales, it makes it so the yarn should not felt, which makes for maybe easier care and washing if that's a concern for you. But it does also mean that it's lost a bit of its integrity, and it will grow more, it won't bounce back quite as much after blocking, and there may be some areas that are more affected than others in the thing you're knitting, especially when it comes to like ribbing. This doesn't have ribbing right here, it has a picot bind up, but there's ribbing down here, ribbing. I find can stretch out more. So things to think about when you're trying to sub one yarn for the other is I would do a bigger swatch, one that you could even hang up to see how much it's gonna grow, like a 6 by 6 inch at least. And I would measure your swatch before you block it and after so that you can see how much that yarn has grown. Ideally, if I was gonna sub a superwash for a non-superwash sweater pattern, I would prefer to do that with a top-down pattern. So, because again, I think the issues are gonna be growth. A lot of times that superwash yarn might end up inadvertently adding up to a couple inches of length on the body and the sleeves after blocking. So again, if you know your gauge, then you should be able to do that calculation and go, okay, I measured it before and after, and this is how much it grew. So now I know this is about how much it's gonna grow on my sleeves or my body. But worst comes to worst, if it's top down, you could always clip the edge, unravel, and then reknit your ribbing at a shorter length once you really know, because it's gravity and wearing the sweater that's gonna be the truest answer to that question. But yeah, you still want to try and get gauge, definitely the stitch gauge, but taking into account if you're going to have more growth than you would with a non-superwash. So I find that to be the more tricky part, is it might grow more lengthwise than you had anticipated. The other thing about a non-superwash yarn that I find is that ribbing tends to blow out and doesn't hold up quite as well. So take that into consideration if you're knitting a sweater where it's important that that ribbing keeps its pull in, or like on a hat. And I would maybe even consider going down a couple needle sizes more, like 1 or 2 more, to see if you can't help keep the integrity of that ribbing. Yeah, I hope that helped. All right, next question. Love your tutorials, and after having seen your hands so much, I'm so curious about the tattoos on your hands. Not sure if they're food related or that's my impression. Could you talk about the meaning of them? I know you've talked about the big one for the love that's on my chest, but so curious to know the meaning of your fingers. Thanks so much. All right, so yeah, I actually get this question a lot, so I thought I would answer it. On my hand is a human heart made out of leaves and branches, and it's just kind of like wearing my heart on my sleeve. And then my knuckles are actually the seasons in plant form, and then my thumbs are rain, I guess it goes, I can't twist my other way, rain and sun. So yeah, that's what they are. And yeah, all right, question number 4. I love your videos, such good info. My questions are, how do you like to knit socks? 2 at a time? I would love to start knitting socks, but it seems difficult. So I think as long as you get comfortable with small circumference knitting, socks are pretty easy to knit. It's really just being in a small circumference, and besides the heel and the toe, it's pretty easy breezy. I have knit socks 2 at a time, but that is not what I do anymore. I just find that how cumbersome it is to deal with the 2 yarn balls and the 2 socks, and is actually more of a put off for me than just knitting a second sock when I'm done with the first one. I find what is more important for me is that there's something about the socks that's engaging that I really enjoy that will make me want to knit the second sock after I'm done with the first one. And the great thing about socks is there's so many options. There's different toes and heels, and you can do toe up, cuff down. So I think just jumping in and trying a pair, and then if you don't love that pair, starting to explore like what would make it more engaging or enjoyable for you. But I love knitting socks now. I was not always a sock knitter. I used to really love to knit. Well, I didn't love to knit them. I always used to choose to knit knee socks, and then I would have trouble finishing them, but I realized that's like a sweater's quantity worth of stitches for my feet. And so now I knit ankle or like calf length socks, and that works out better for me. And this person snuck in a second question: how do you do your sleeves? 2 at a time, DPNs, magic loop. So again, I don't do the 2 at a time. I know a lot of people do and they love it. And I think if you love it, that is awesome. I just isn't my jam. And I am definitely a magic looper. I don't even own double pointed needles anymore. I loved them when I first started knitting. I think I felt like it was some kind of magical sorcery being able to handle all those needles at once. But because I used to travel so much for work pre-pandemic, and I like to have everything I need no matter what I'm doing, I switched to magic loop, and I love that with my interchangeable needle set. I've shown it a few times here. I have everything I need no matter what circumference I'm knitting. And magical loop, it is a magical loop. Magic loop just is super intuitive for me, but I think, again, that is the beauty of knitting, is there are different ways to do all of the different things in knitting, whether it be what hand you hold the yarn in, or short rows, or small circumference knitting. Like, there's always a different way to do it. And so find the way that feels good for you, that feels fun and easy for you. So I'm a magical looper all the way. And I'm a 1 at a timer. And I find that the first one, whether it be sock or sleeve, is always kind of my figuring things out, jotting down which rows I decrease or increase on. Like, I always make notes. And then the second one's just a breeze because I just follow what I did for the first one. All right, hi Andrea, what is your better way to bind off socks? So another sock question, and I actually would love to hear if any of you have a favorite sock bind off. I have used a few. Generally what I do these days is actually I just go up a lot of needle sizes and I do a regular bind off. I find that I like how this looks. I've tried Jenny's stretchy bind off, Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off for socks, and to be honest, I don't love how it looks on socks. There's something about it, it just, I don't know, it's like a little too much for me. I also do love a tubular bind off, so I will do that. But otherwise, if I'm using, let's say, between a size 0 or 2 needle, I would go up to a size like 5 or 6 to do my bind off. And that seems to keep it loose enough. I am a toe up knitter, so I'm assuming they were talking, yeah, it would have to be the cuff, because generally you're not binding off the toe, you're grafting it. All right, bonus question. Oh wow, I'm breezing through these today. We definitely have time for a bonus question. All right, you've mentioned a couple different professions. What are all your jobs in order, if an option? So I've had a number of jobs. Are we talking just professions here? If we're talking just like careers, I started off with baking. I moved to Austin, Texas in my early 20s and started working at a bakery, which I got hired at because on my resume I said I was a knitter, and they liked that. So all you knitters out there, when you're looking for jobs, mention that you're a knitter, might get you the job. And actually it was a gluten-free bakery. So when I first started baking, it was gluten-free, which is kind of cool. But that really got me more into cooking. I mean, I grew up, my mom and my grandma always made everything from scratch. So I grew up around a lot of cooking, but being in a kitchen like that, I started getting just really interested in all the aspects of it. I wanted to know why things worked the way they worked. I loved decorating cakes, was a super fun part of my job. So yeah, I was a baker. I went to a culinary school that was actually for healing. So it was called the Natural Epicurean. It was also in Austin, Texas. And we focused a lot on healing all different kinds of illnesses, especially terminal illness, with diet. So I did that until I had to move back to Michigan due to a family emergency. And in Michigan, where I had grown up, there weren't a lot of baking jobs for the style of baking I had done, which my goal when I was a baker was to create baked goods that everyone could enjoy. So a lot of times they were allergen free, they were plant-based. That was kind of my focus. I wanted everyone to be able to have the treat. So I kind of needed to think of something else to do, and I think it was my mom actually who kind of prodded me in the direction of going to cosmetology school. I did realize at a young age that I kind of needed an active job with an artistic outlet. It kind of made me happiest. I like to be on my feet. I like to be busy. So I went to cosmetology school, and I did that for a little bit, but shortly after I graduated, my now husband and I moved out to LA, and I got back into baking. I worked at Baby Cakes in LA, which is another gluten-free bakery. And when we moved back to Michigan, I ended up doing hair for a little bit longer, and then my best friend from high school opened up a food truck, and I started working for them, and then they opened up their restaurant, and I became their pastry chef. So that was kind of my journey through those different careers until I got pregnant with my daughter and left my baking job to be home with her, and very quickly realized that working was a big part of my identity. I'd been working since I was about 13, and I didn't really know what to do with myself without working and kind of having that creative outlet. So that is when I started doing knitwear design. So yeah, there's all my professions. Okay, I'm wearing even fall. I'll link it below. I will also link how to ask a question. If you have a question you want me to try to answer to the best of my ability, I'll do it. And there's also a link to my newsletter to get all the good news and stay up to date, get sales, all that good stuff. And if you like this, feel free to subscribe so you know when I've posted a new video, but they're usually out on Fridays. And I hope y'all have a great weekend. Bye.